What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Renewables, brought to you by the Renewable Energy Smart Pod. I'm your host, Sean McMahon, and I hope you had a fantastic weekend. To kick off the week, here are some of the stories we're tracking today, July 28th, 2025. President Donald Trump announced a trade agreement with the European Union that includes a 15% tariff on most imports from the bloc. As part of that agreement, the EU committed to buying $750 billion worth of U.S. energy over the next 3 years. Of course, the renewables industry is not expected to see much of those dollars, with most of it going to oil, LNG, and nuclear fuel. The EU also agreed to increase its investment in the U.S. by $600 billion from current levels. However, details about which industries would receive those dollars and how the overall total would be tracked were not made available by the White House. The experts at Grid Strategies have released a report that finds that the U.S. needs to add at least 5,000 miles of high-voltage transmission per year to keep up with surging power demand and support renewables integration. However, only 888 miles were added last year. The 5,000-mile goal is based on the Energy Department's 2024 National Transmission Planning Study. And Grid Strategies notes that development has slowed significantly since reaching 4,000 miles in 2013. Republican state lawmakers in North Carolina are planning a vote this week to potentially override Governor Josh Stein's veto of Senate Bill 266. The measure would repeal Duke Energy's 2030 emissions deadline while leaving in place a provision for carbon neutrality by 2050. BW Research estimates that the measure would slow Duke's investment in wind, solar, and other forms of electrical generation, ultimately costing the state more than 50,000 jobs per year and $47 billion in lost investment. On the technology front, Electrified Thermal Solutions, a spinout from MIT, has partnered with Harbison Walker International to produce e-bricks for the Joule Hive thermal battery, which aims to decarbonize heavy industry by using renewable electricity to store heat at 3,275 degrees Fahrenheit. The collaboration, which leverages HWI's manufacturing capabilities to scale production rapidly, is part of an initiative to deploy 2 gigawatts of thermal power by 2030. And finally, while geothermal energy might be gaining momentum in the U.S. as a renewable energy source, the industry is facing some staffing shortages. Scientific experts such as geologists are in high demand, as are drilling engineers and experts in other roles. The Trump administration has certainly shown support for geothermal, but the workforce gap could hinder the industry's expansion. And speaking of geothermal, as I mentioned on Friday's show, coming up later this week, I'll be talking to Mike Richter, the president of Brightcore Energy. Mike, whose name some of you might remember as the former goalie for the NHL's New York Rangers, joined me for an in-depth interview where we talked about numerous projects that Brightcore is undertaking, and we spent a significant time talking about geothermal. So watch for that episode to hit your podcast feed later this week. That's all for today's headlines, but just remember, these are just a sampling of some of the stories you can read about in our daily newsletter, the Renewable Energy Smart Brief. To sign up, click on the link in today's show notes. The Renewable Energy Smart Pod is a production of Smart Brief, a future company.